Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to our Garden Shop Garden Guru workshop this morning. Welcome to all of you. All the names seem familiar to me, so if I've missed somebody along the line there that's new, we're glad to have you here with us, and we do hope that you enjoy this workshop. So we're sitting here in a very cold Johannesburg this morning, I think, and they say it's quite an unprecedented cold that we're having here today. But I think it's just winter, and we've got to have winter too, because, you know, winter gets rid of all of those pests and diseases that might pop out in springtime and in summertime. So at least it gets rid of some of those nasties that's going to eat and molest your plants in the summer season. So today we're talking about super soil and how important soil is for your garden. And I think most of you would know that to me this is quite an important thing about your garden, because if you don't have a good foundation for your plants to grow in, you're not going to have beautiful plants. So and apart from that, the whole thing about organic gardening and sustainable gardening, etc., all starts with the soil. So I am going to flip to our PowerPoint show here, and I'm going to share the screen with you if I can find it. Where on earth did that go? Ah, there it is. Just get that one in there, and I just want to quickly get onto this piece here. Let me just admit everybody here and minimize this screen and minimize this screen. There we go, and then we can share our PowerPoint presentation. I hope you've all got that in front of you. And as I said, today we're talking about super soil, and it's all about soil and soil health and how important it is for your garden. So what is the value of healthy soil? Like a decent house needs a decent foundation, healthy plants also need healthy soil in order to provide them with nutrients, with water, with air, and all the other things that plants need to grow well. And I must say, more than often, your soil at home in your garden is probably not at its optimum best. We all have to deal with whatever we've got, and we've got to try and improve the soil as far as possible, because very few people are blessed with like perfect soil. But there are a few things that we can do in order to improve the soil so that those nutrients and things are available to the plants. Now, building and maintaining healthy soil is probably the single most important thing that you can do in your garden in order to have a beautiful garden, a successful vegetable garden, and everything else that goes with it. You will see also that if your soil improves, you would probably have to do less work in your garden. Now, we're trying to sort of create biological diversity in our soil. We're also trying to get food production into our soil for the plants, that is. Then we also want the soil to have water retention benefits and carbon storage and other nutrients as well. So, oh, I don't know what happened there. There we go. Let me just go on there. So, soil doesn't appear by magic, and soil is not made in a factory either. you can't just wave a wand and poof, you've got beautiful soil. And also, as I said, it's very difficult to deal with the soil that you've got because you can't dig out your entire garden and fill it up with proper soil. So you've got to go through like a prolonged process in order to make your soil more healthy and more beneficial for your plants. Now, soil comes from broken up pieces of rock, from dead leaves, from tree sticks, and also remember things that die in the soil, microbes, dead bugs, maybe even a mole that died underground. So no, soil doesn't happen by itself. And soil has parent material, and that parent material is basically those things that we've been talking about. It's dead plant material, it's rocks that's been weathered down, and then other decaying organisms in the soil. And that is basically your parent material. Now, what does weather do to soil? And that's quite an interesting thing because at the moment it's quite cold. And you must remember, if you've got rocks and you've got the sun burning onto rocks and you then cool those rocks down, you get cracks in the rocks, and that breaks the rocks down into smaller pieces and smaller pieces. So you can well see that the weather has quite an influence on the formation of soil. I don't know if anybody out there has ever like put a rock in the fire and then pour cold water over it. I would suggest you don't try this at home because it can be quite dangerous. But sometimes the rock would just split up into pieces. I know in the old days, the farmers actually used to do that. They used to make like, if they like plowing in new land and there's like a very big rock there, then they would make a fire around and on top of the rock, and then they would pour water over so that the rock would crack into smaller pieces. Now that rock can actually quite explode too, and that's why I say you shouldn't actually try this at home. Take my word for it, I've seen it happening. So the more the rock breaks up, the smaller the particles get until such time that it becomes soil. Rain and ice can also play their part in weathering rocks down. Water, for instance, I mean, if you think of the Orange River Canyon, especially there at the Ugrabis Falls, how the water wears down the rocks there. Rain can do the same, and then ice, of course, too. I mean, if you look at what glaciers does.
Sue, can you hear us?
Yes.
Sorry, we can't see the PowerPoint.
Can't you see the PowerPoint? Okay.
No,
I'm going to quickly go out and I'm going to re-share it.
Okay.
Let me do that. Can you see it now? Does everybody have the PowerPoint in front of them now?
I can see it now.
Okay. I have. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. I'm just going to quickly flip through it again. So that's our front page there, super soil. And then the value of healthy soil, which you can see there, biological diversity, food production, water benefits, and carbon storage. And then soil isn't made by magic. It's got parent material and the influence on weather on the formation of soil. Okay, now what's interesting is that soil actually has a horizon, so it's got different layers, and they named the O layer, the A layer, the B layer, and the C layer, and it's not in a alphabetical sequence. So O is your top horizon, and that's about 10 centimeters thick, and that's made out of dead stuff that breaks down and it keeps the soil oh so healthy. So that's your O layer. Then the A horizon is the top soil that's alive with roots and tiny micro stuff like bacteria, fungi, and all sorts of other things like earthworms. And the A horizon is also A-OK. Okay, number 3 is the B horizon, and plants and animals have a tough time to penetrate that layer because it's quite hard. And then you can see the C horizon as even less living stuff in it, and that is basically the parent material that's just made out of the basic rock and those that's in the 3 layers above from that. So you can see there's the O layer on top there that contains a lot of organic material, your A layer, and then your B layer, which is a tougher layer, and your C layer. So those are the 4 basic layers that you get in your soil. Now, how does water stay in the soil? Now, water pours into the soil through pores, and that's basically like little holes in the soil, and they're in different sizes depending on what type of soil you've got. The bigger the pore, the more water it holds, and some soils like sandy soil has very big pores, while clay soil has very little pores. So in other words, water would drain through sandy soil quite easily because it's really got like pipelines running through it to redirect the water. And air gets into the soil in the same way through those pores, and also organisms in the soil that burrows like earthworms, they make little tunnels and the air gets into the soil that way. Remember, earthworms don't have lungs for breathing, they breathe through their skins, and that is why they usually live in soil that is quite moist, because otherwise their skins would dry out and they would not be able to breathe, and they would then subsequently die, which is not anything that we would want to happen. Now, why do plants need soil? Now, first of all, plants need soil for anchorage most of the time. In other words, the soil sort of keep them upright. And then they also need to satisfy their appetites. And obviously they don't eat pizzas or banana splits or whatever the case might be, because those type of things can't fit into the plant roots, and they don't have ovens there either. But they eat other nutrients like nitrogen, phosphates, and potassium. Those are your macronutrients, things that plants need a lot of. And then you also get your micronutrients, that's things that plants need less of. That is things like boron, molybdenum, cobalt, zinc, manganese, chlorine, and all sorts of other stuff that plants need in order to grow healthy. Now, plant roots also help the soil because they penetrate the soil, so they loosen the soil, and they also absorb water from the soil, preventing the soil from becoming too wet and muddy. And they also help the other living organisms in the soil, like some plants' roots would fix nitrogen in the soil, which would then benefit other organisms in the soil, that would also benefit decomposition, etc., etc. Some plants have very strong roots, and they even help to split up rocks that will later become soil. I've seen some really, really big trees growing over rocks, and I'm sure all of you have seen sometimes, maybe like even in a small little crevice or something where a tree would grow in or start growing, and those roots are then very strong and they would break up the roots. One of the type of trees is our Ficus natalensis or our Natal fig. They've got very, very, very strong roots, and they can quite easily start breaking up rocks for that matter. That is why you don't plant them too close to your house either, because they will do the same to the foundation of your house. Now, how can we keep the soil from washing and blowing away? By covering the soil is basically the best way. Farmers sometimes dig trenches to sort of redirect water so that all the topsoil, that good soil, doesn't wash away. They also plant windbreaks, because wind blows away that very healthy top section of the soil, which plants really need to grow in. So I'm sure you've driven sort of in the countryside where there's farms, and I think especially sort of towards the Cape, they tend to plant windbreaks along the fields on the farms in order to prevent the soil from blowing away. You can also cover your soil with plants, with mulch, with lawns. Any soil that's basically covered won't blow away, and it will not erode. Now, it's important that we know our soil, and that you know what you're dealing with in your garden in order to grow the right plants in the right soil, and in order to help that soil to become a better type soil. Each soil type has its own methods to improve the soil, and in order to get the best for your plants, you may need to adjust your soil in some way, because some plants may struggle to grow and survive in certain types of soil. Now, we can sort of break down soil types in three basic types, which is sandy soil, loam soil, and basically then clay soil. Now, what is clay soil? Clay soils are naturally fertile, but they can be very, very difficult to work with. Individual particles are so small and flat that they pack so tightly together. And remember, that's where we actually get natural clay from, that's used in ceramics and pottery and baking of vessels, etc. So there's very, very little room for water and air to sort of penetrate into the soil. In other words, the clay soil is really going to drain badly or poorly, but it will also stay wet a lot longer once that water has actually penetrated the soil. It's very difficult to work in clay soil. If it dries out, it really becomes like a brick, and it really it's difficult to cultivate. It's difficult to dig in it, because if it's not entirely dried out, then it's so wet that it sort of sticks together. Now, the best way to actually improve clay soil is to add lots of sand to it, and then lots of organic material, like compost, for instance. Because as I say, I don't think most people don't have the means to actually go and dig out their whole garden and put in proper soil. So we've got to adjust the soil as we go along. Now, the next soil is loam soil, and that's basically your best type of soil. It's got good fertility, moderate fertility. In other words, there's quite a lot of nutrients in it, but it also has spaces in which air and water can move. It has a lot of organic material that acts like a sponge. We call it a saturate. In other words, it actually holds the water, and it's usually a looser type of soil because of all the organic material in the soil. Now, there's usually in loam soil sort of finer particles and a bit more sandy particles. and this loam soil can easily be blown away or washed away. But that is by far the best type of soil to actually have in your garden. Now, the last soil is basically sandy soils. And sandy soils, because the pores in the sandy soil are so big, the nutrients in the soil basically leaches away. There's very, very little organic material in sandy soil. So it doesn't sort of create new nutrients either. The water drains through the sandy soil very quickly as well. And because of the fact that there is very little organic material in the sandy soil, there's also less microbes and things in the sandy soil that would then supply and make nutrients for your plants. So again, if you've got very sandy soil, your best bet would be to add loads and loads of organic material as much as possible, because that will most definitely improve your soil. Sandy soil, on the other hand, is very loose, so it actually makes it very easy for plant roots and things to then penetrate into the soil. Now, how do we get healthy soil? And there's 4 things that you want to remember if you want to maintain healthy soil. The first thing is to maximize continuous living roots. We've explained that plants, the roots actually sort of tunnel through the soil. Some types of plants, like especially your legumes, that is your beans and peas and even lupins, those type of plants, they actually fix nitrogen into the soil. Also, the roots that sort of die off, decay in the soil, that becomes organic matter, and there's other organisms that feed on that. So very important, maximize continuous living roots in your soil. Second point, minimize disturbance, and I am going to get back to that at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. And then maximize soil cover, and I think we've spoken a little bit about that, because once your soil is covered, you will have less water evaporation, plus if there's winds or water wash, your healthy soil won't wash away. And then the last point is to maximize biodiversity in your soil in order to keep your soil healthy. Now, building healthy soil means providing life to other things, not only the plants, the microbes, the worms, like the earthworms, definitely not those big fat worms, misworms as we call them in Afrikaans, that you get in the soil. Those aren't terribly beneficial to your plants. And have the material in the soil for the environment to actually do a proper job. Taking from the soil without giving anything back breaks the natural cycle in the soil. Harvesting crops and raking fallen leaves removes the organic material from your soil, and that is destined for the soil when it falls, because it's actually supposed to biodegrade, go back into the soil. If this organic material isn't replenished, the soil health is going to decline. And substituting synthetic chemicals and fertilizers for naturally occurring nutrients may feed the plants, but it is actually starving the soil. And I think most of you also know that I've often said that your chemical fertilizers are great for using intermittently between organic fertilizers, because chemical fertilizers, the carriers in the chemical fertilizers is lime, which is basically a salt, and a prolonged use of that will actually make your soil black, and you won't have any microorganisms living in that soil. In other words, you're going to break that whole circuit. Whereas your chemical of your organic fertilizers, the carrier of that is carbon. Carbon is a magic element. It neutralizes things, and it would then neutralize the salt in the soil, and it would promote growth in your soil and ultimately for your plants. Now, I think 2 weeks ago we spoke about acid-loving plants, and part of the soil health is basically sort of checking the pH. Now, usually our pH around here is more or less neutral. So unless you've starved your soil with chemical fertilizers, in which case your pH can really go up depending on how much salt is then actually in the soil. Our soil in terms of pH are pretty much balanced, but you can improve your soil pH to a neutral pH by using organic material and organic fertilizers that contains carbon. The reason for that is because for most plants, they can't absorb the elements that they need to absorb, the nitrogen, the potassium, the sulfur, whatever it is that they need from the soil if the pH is not balanced. So important to keep an eye on the pH of your soil, and you don't have to go out and get a pH meter. You will quite quickly see if there is a pH problem with your soil. Which actually reminds me, just before I started this meeting, Monica, I think you are on this call, and you had a question about your soil, and I would imagine that it's in your pots making white rings on top, and I well suspect that that is actually a build-up of salt in your pots. It could be because you've been using chemical fertilizers to actually feed your plants in your pots. It could also be that the plants have been in the pots for quite a long time, and that the municipal water, which basically contains chlorine, has also added to a salt built up in the soil. So I would suggest that you use an organic fertilizer like Nitrosol or something like that in your pots to start neutralizing the pH of your soil. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question, Monica. It could also be a fungal infection in the soil, but I think in that case you would maybe just need to send me a little picture, and then I can have a look at that. So building healthy soil in the wild, soil life is sustained and nutrients are recycled through natural processes. Microorganisms, earthworms, and other decomposers feed on this organic matter, and it transforms it into nutrients that the plants can basically use. The process is slow, it's steady, and it's ongoing. Plants grow, they die, they decompose, the cycle continues. So getting your soil to be at a level where it's healthy is not an instantaneous process. It's an ongoing process, and it can take years and years. If you maintain, for instance, tidy perennial beds, and you harvest your crops out of your vegetable garden, and you dig out all the weeds all the time, you are changing the natural dynamic in the soil, because you're removing the organic matter that is meant to actually then decompose in the soil. To keep the soil healthy, you must put something back. It may mean mulching your flower beds with bark or other types of mulch, adding compost, and using organic fertilizers with a lot of carbon in it to neutralize the salt buildup. And it is actually quite a job to maintain this sort of dynamic underground system in your soil. Now, how do I maintain healthy soil? First of all, you need to feed the microorganisms and the other soil life. Beneficial bacteria, protozoa, fungi, nematodes, beneficial nematodes, I might add, and other soil microbes consume organic matter and also one another. And they excrete that matter in a form that plants can use for growth. In other words, potassium, phosphates, and nitrogen, and then all the microelements as well. Earthworms, beetles, and other creatures also eat organic matter and tunnel through the soil, creating beneficial air spaces, water spaces, and again, excreting nutrients. An earthworm, for instance, a single earthworm releases 3 times its own weight per day in nitrogen. So you can see how that can be beneficial to your garden. Now you also want to decrease harmful disease organisms. Beneficial microbes prey on and control harmful organisms. You also don't want any plant damaging nematodes and fungi getting into your soil. I'm thinking, for instance, of eelworm, which goes into your potatoes. Now that is actually quite easy to solve, because all you need to do is plant some marigolds around your potatoes, and that nematode will then sort of lay its eggs in the marigold roots, but the nematode can't develop or the nematode larva can't develop in the roots, so it basically cuts off that whole cycle, because otherwise you really have to like sterilize your soil, which in a home garden is not beneficial for your soil, because then you kill all life in your soil, which you don't want. You want living soil, not dead soil. And also it is extremely toxic and not really user-friendly for home gardens. The next thing is to improve your soil structure. And again, organic matter helps to improve your soil structure, because organic matter, as I said, also acts as a sponge. It's a saturate. It holds water together. It helps sandy soils to stick together. It holds water, it holds nutrients, and it helps to open spaces between small sticky clay particles, so that the soil can drain better and that there's more oxygen in the air. So basically the way to improve your soil structure is to add loads and loads of organic matter. And I must add there, make sure that when you add organic matter into your soil, that it's fully decomposed, because I think I've said this before, if you have plant material that's not fully decomposed, you dig it into the soil, the first phase of decomposition is basically an anaerobic phase, and that anaerobic phase will then take nitrogen out of the soil instead of putting nitrogen into the soil. So if material is undecomposed, you can put it on top of the soil as a layer, as a mulch. That would be perfectly fine, and that would then naturally break down into the bottom soil. Another way to maintain healthy soil is to increase reserve of soil nutrients. Soil microbes store nutrients in their body. They release those nutrients as they die and are consumed by other microbes, which also again then releases nutrients. The more microbes the soil contains, the more nutrients the soil can store, the healthier the soil is, and the more beneficial it will be for your plants. So that brings me back to the point of tillage. And you might ask, what is tillage? And tillage is basically where you are turning the soil. You can dig it, you can use big mechanical things to do that. But I think, you know, perceptions have changed in the past. People used to like dig over their flower beds to have it cleaned from weeds, to have it look all beautiful, but tillage really isn't all that good for your soil. So what is the benefits or the harm that tillage can do to your soil? Now, obviously, tilling your soil is an easy way to incorporate things like fertilizers, compost, green manure, etc., into your soil, because you can just dig it over into your soil. But we'll get to that in a moment. So you can also take out the weeds quite easily if you like digging over the whole piece of soil, and that can then facilitate their decomposition. But it can also bring weed seeds to the surface of the soil where they can germinate readily, and it can also stop the weeds of perennial weeds. It could chop up the roots or some pieces of the plant into pieces, and you know, there's quite a few weeds, especially like the little grass onions and those type of things. The moment you start turning those things, those little bulbs just spread all over. You get some weeds that's like a sort of a succulent type of plant. If that little leaf just falls off the plant when you're digging it over, then it will come up in triplicate the next season. And also you will spread those seeds of the weeds into the soil. Now, tillage also kills insects, and it disturbs the biodiversity of the soil, because every time you turn the soil, you are disturbing that environment in which these organisms, earthworms, microorganisms, and other things in the soil live. And that whole process has to start all over again. Yes, tillage can make your beds look clean and neat and tidy, but it also damages the soil structure over a long period, increasing the risk of good drainage, because those particles, like in clay soil, are going to get closer and closer together, because there's no organic material in the soil that falls into the soil naturally, and then you will get little water and little air penetrating into your soil. Whereas with non-tillage soil, the soil will have that natural cycle in which organic material are decomposed and then incorporated into your topsoil layer. Tilling hastens the breakdown of desirable organic material, but then you've got to add organic material more frequently into your soil, because it's not naturally decomposing into your soil. And then I think the final point about tillage or digging over your soil is it promotes erosion, especially when you're gardening on a slope or in a windy area. You are going to lose a lot of that top layer of your soil, which is basically the most fertile bit of your soil for your plants. We've already said that repeated tilling can create a compacted layer just below the tilled layer. In other words, you're digging over the top bit, and then that bottom bit is starting to compact, and that then sort of acts like a dam, because the water sort of drains through the first bit of soil, and then it sort of gets stuck. So not very, very good for your soil. So my personal opinion in terms of tillage is that you should do as little as possible tillage. If you want to remove weeds, remove them one by hand. Use mulch layers, because mulch layers will not only keep the moisture into the soil, they will also prevent weeds from germinating, because the weed seeds won't get any sun in which they could germinate. And what's more is mulch is going to add to the general soil health of the soil in your garden. Now, I found a little video here, and I think it's from the Australian Department of Agriculture, and they have got a very simple experiment that they do in terms of soil, in terms of how you can recognize between soil that's clayish or sandyish and loamish. And it is actually quite a famous experiment. They call it the ribbon experiment. When I was studying at university, it was called the sausage experiment, but I'm going to share this with you now.
There's a lot of reasons why it's really important and really helpful for farming to understand what your soil texture is. One of the major things is so that you can understand what sort of crops will grow really well in your soil, because a sand will grow one type of crop well, and a clay or a loam will grow another type of crop quite well. If you have got large bits of gravel in your soil, that'll affect some crops as well. So it really is helpful for you to understand what the texture is. Just when you pick up the soil or you dig up the soil, you've got all those sort of funny lumpy bits, and sometimes they're not so easy to texture. So what I'm going to do is sieve that soil first. So I'll just break all those little bits up in the sieve. What I'm just going to do is get a whole handful of this and add some water a little bit at a time. So just squirt some water on there and gradually add the water. Don't sort of rush in there all at once, because what you want to do is make a little ball in your hand with just enough water so that that ball holds together. If you make it too sloppy, it's too hard to tell what the texture is. So just mix that all around just to make sure that holds together as well as it can. And what you're doing while you're doing this is feeling what's happening with those grains. You're measuring those grains, the sizes of the grains in your hand. Now I can feel that there's a lot of really individual little sand grains in there. So, and this ball of soil isn't holding together very well. I think it'd fall apart really easily if I let it. So what I'm going to do now is to see how well it holds together by making a ribbon with the soil. So make it kind of into a bit of a sausage shape, and then squeeze it between your forefinger and your thumb into your other hand, and just see how well it holds together in a ribbon. And it's not making much of a ribbon, then it's a sand. All right, the next texture group after sand is, it's called silt, or some people call it loam. Now, the particle sizes that you're measuring here are a lot finer than what you've just been looking at with sand. You can still just feel it, but they often feel much silkier and much smoother than sand. You'll find that the ribbon's a lot longer than the sand was able to achieve. It holds together much better than the sand. Sands will not have very good water or nutrient holding capacity, whereas a silt will have a much better water and nutrient holding capacity. This is another loamy soil. I can feel that it's much more silky, and with these soils, because they're a little bit heavier, I tend to play with it in my hand for a little bit longer, because as I said, sometimes the texture starts to feel stronger and stronger. But because there is a lot more clay in this soil, we would probably call this a clay loam. Now we have a bit of a lump of heavier soil without texture, and sometimes it's very hard to see it, especially if it's a bit dry. And again, this one feels really quite soapy and silky, which tells me it's got a lot of clay, really, really, really fine particles in it. A bit sticky again. Tells you it's got a lot of clay in it. And what also tells you it's clay is that it gets much harder to manipulate in your hand. Particularly if you think it is clay, it is worth moving it in your hand for a little bit longer, as I said, just to make sure all those clay particles are released into the ball. You get a much clearer idea of how heavy the clay is. A lot of people think clay soils are fabulous, but they're not always so easy to manage. Sometimes there's a big problem with poor drainage in clay soils, and you might have waterlogging. Crops can sometimes have difficulty accessing the water and the nutrients that's bound up in those soils. So they need very careful management also.
Well, that's the Australian Department of Agriculture for you. I hope you found that informative, and yeah, go home and do that little soil test there. I always do the same test with my students that come onto my gardeners courses, and it's always great fun. I always get pretty dirty too. I don't know how that lady gets to do it, everything so neat and tidy. I'll have to give it some practice. We usually sort of roll it into a donut as well, and if it like falls apart, then that's like sandy soil. The loamy soil would have like cracks on the donut, whereas the clay soil would then make a solid donut. So that's just a bit of fun. You could maybe take the kids or the grandkids out there and get them to recognize some soil types as well. So finally, while soil may be common and everywhere around us, and we might take it for granted, it's important that we remember just how important it is for our very, very existence and to the existence of the things that we use each day. Healthy soil helps to bind particles together, it improves the soil structure, it retains water, and it improves soil fertility, and in the end, it improves the health of your plants and the things that you grow in your soil. So why don't you become a soil conservation manager there in your garden? So just finally, our upcoming courses and workshops, our fruit tree pruning and care workshop, that is for the I see it says here the 30th of July. It's actually the 31st of July. It's the Saturday. We have migrated that to an online workshop because under the current circumstances, we are not allowed to have large gatherings. So we will be doing this workshop on the 31st of July, Saturday, from 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock Online, the cost for this workshop is 200 Rand. If you are interested, give me a shout and I can send you all the details, or otherwise you could go to Quicket, look at Roots for the Earth, fruit tree pruning workshop, and you can book through Quicket. Then we've got our gardeners course at Parktown starting on the 24th of August, and the gardeners course at Bryanston starting on the 25th of August. And I hope by that time we would be able to get to those venues where we can then conduct those courses in person. So again, if you want any information regarding that, send me an email and I can send you all the details for that. So I'm sure all of you are sitting at the edge of your seats wondering who our lucky winner is today. And the lucky winner of our Effecto hamper for last week is, and I've got Nomalisa here with me because poor Doris, she's still ill, but she's getting better, I believe. So Nomalisa is standing in. You must close your eyes, Nomalisa, otherwise, and you must mix it all well. So Nomalisa is going to quickly do the draw for us here. Let me. You maybe want to see Nomalisa here. Whoa, what's happening here now? Come. Aha. Nomalisa, you must come in a little bit here so that people can see you. There's Nomalisa. She's not cheating. Okay. Okay. And our winner today is Maria Momberg. Congratulations, Maria. You've won our Effecto hamper this week, and I shall be in contact with you to see how we can get that hamper to you. I must add, Effecto hasn't delivered those hampers yet because of all the disruptions that we've had in the last 2 weeks, but it will be here duly and I will get it to you. Now, this week we've got another competition. Let me just get to our next slide here. What is happening here? Aha. And Protec is sponsoring our competition this week. You can win a lovely Protec hamper, and those hampers are here with me. And the question for today is name one of the 3 main swirl types that you get. Name one of the 3 main swirl types that you get. You can email your answers to me, subi@gardenshop.co.za, and you will be in the draw for next week. So name one of the 3 main swirl types that we get. Send me an email, subi@gardenshop.co.za, and you will be in draw for our Protec competition next Friday. So finally, you can see it's not only gardeners that does soil sampling, but I think us gardeners sort of do it in a better way. These civil engineers there on the right hand side has taken things a bit literally, and they are actually tasting the soil in order to sample it. So that's all from me for today, folks. Remember, if you're interested in any of our courses, workshops, give me a shout, subi@gardenshop.co.za. You can phone me with your questions, 011 465 6485, or if you've got any other gardening questions, subi@gardenshop.co.za. And remember, all our presentations that we do here on our Friday workshops are available on our website, gardenshop.co.za. If you go to the news tab, they all uploaded there, and you can find all the historical stuff there. And if you're going into any of our stores, Remember, we've got our garden gurus, qualified horticulturists in every single store. At Broadacres, it is Solomzi, at Bryanston, Sibuile, and at Parktown, Godfrey. So if you've got any questions, go and seek out those gentlemen. They're very helpful and very knowledgeable, and they would definitely assist you with any of your garden problems. So that's all from me, folks. Until next Friday. Thank you, Nomalisa, for joining us. We've got Doris back next week. Not that I want to chase you away, but I just wish she would be back. We all wish her well and a speedy recovery. And for the rest of you, stay safe, keep gardening, and take care. Until next Friday. Thank you.